one from the left, one from the right, but united in their belief that the freedom of speech is the foundation of all that we have in this country. Without the absolute right to say what you believe, you are not a citizen. You are not even fully human. You are a serf. Glenn Greenwald is a lifelong man of the left. He did not vote for Donald Trump. He opposed, in fact, many of Donald Trump's policies. But above all, Glenn Greenwald is a defender of the principles of the Enlightenment, and he is unyielding in that. Totally unyielding. So unyielding, he was recently driven from his employer, and he now writes independently on Substack, where we hope you will support him. Then we will speak to a lifelong man of the right, someone whose biography and views, and indeed whose face you know well. Glenn Beck joins us in a moment. But first tonight to Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So this statement from Twitter encapsulated so much of what is happening and what is yet to come that I have to ask you about it to begin. Here you have a tech company acting as if it possesses its own State Department, giving totally unself-aware instructions about internet freedom to foreign countries across the Atlantic Ocean. What can we infer from this statement?
Well, I do think that the tweet to which that alludes, and that you were alluding to in your opening, is an event that we need to pause and think about, because to me it was one of the most alarming events to take place in American politics in the last decade, which is that in the weeks up to the 2020 election, Twitter and Facebook united to ban any discussion of reporting by the nation's oldest newspaper, the New York Post, about documents regarding the Biden family, the front runner for the President of the United States, that everyone acknowledges were completely authentic. They simply censored any ability to disseminate discussion or reporting about the leading presidential candidate whom they wanted to win. In other words, doing exactly that which they're now lecturing the Ugandans that you can't do without violating the spirit of the open internet and attacking democracy itself. They're right about the principles that they expressed in that tweet. The irony, though, the really sick, dark, and dangerous irony is that they themselves are leading the way, not just Twitter, but Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple, in doing exactly that which they're lecturing other countries that they can't do. And I think the broader point, the more important one, Tucker, is that these countries are acting like nation states, more powerful than nation states, because that's what they are. Facebook, too, has committees now, the way a government would have committees, studying what is true and what is false, what kind of speech is dangerous, what kind of speech isn't dangerous. And that's why the amazing thing is that in the wake of Twitter and Facebook's ban of President Trump, you had numerous democracies around the world who have no love lost for Donald Trump. Quite the contrary. Chancellor Angela Merkel in Germany, the President of Mexico, French ministers who came out and said this is extremely dangerous, that Silicon Valley is anointing itself the world media that controls and is more powerful than other democracies, because they know that's coming for their democracies as well.
So you did some reporting today and yesterday on what happened to the social media app Parler, which was expelled really from the internet, shut down by Amazon Web Services, biggest server farms in the world, on the pretext that they somehow contributed to the violence that we saw last week at the U.S. Capitol. Tell us what you learned about Parler's role in that riot on Wednesday.
So, of the first 13 people arrested by the FBI in connection with the event at the Capitol, a total of 0 were active users of Parler. The overwhelming amount of planning for that event, the overwhelming amount of advocacy for people to go there and to breach the Capitol was done on Facebook and on YouTube and on Twitter. And this is one of the ironies, is that Google was one of the monopolies that wants to police our discourse and control our thinking and rule our politics, that kicked Parler off of its app at exactly the time that Parler had gone to #1, the most downloaded app in the country, millions of Americans wanting to use it. Google said, we will not allow you on our service because the role that you played in stimulating violence and extremism at the Capitol and elsewhere. And the reality is the service that Google owns, YouTube, played a much greater role in organizing and advocating for that event at the Capitol. If Google is really interested in disassociating itself from violence and extremism, they wouldn't disassociate themselves from Parler, but from YouTube. And you had Democratic politicians like AOC and others demanding that Google and Apple kick Parler off, using their power as officials in the party that's about to assume control of the government, and they then obeyed. But why weren't these Democratic officials demanding that Google and Apple kick Facebook and YouTube off of their platforms, since they played a much bigger role? Because they donate and pour huge amounts of money into the Democratic Party and are their allies, and that's what is so menacing here. Not just the censorship from Silicon Valley, but the partnership they're in with the party that's about to take over the Congress and the White House.
Glenn Greenwald, a principled man and always.
This is the reason why I built the Blaze in the first place, is because I saw this coming. It between the political upheaval and, quite honestly, the technological upheaval that is coming, that is going to displace so many people, the government and high tech need each other. So this, with the implosion of trust, they have to join hands. And it's extraordinarily dangerous. It's the kind of stuff, quite honestly, that leads to this. These are two wooden shoes, Japanese shoes, worn by an American citizen. Her name was Rio Soto. She lived in San Francisco. She lost all of her rights, as did all of the Japanese. And they did it because of fear. FDR was afraid the Japanese had infiltrated the West Coast, even though the Pentagon said it wasn't true. He knew better. And so he pushed through his policies, and we made one of the biggest mistakes of the 20th century by taking our own citizens, and listen to this, confiscating their wealth, making sure they couldn't work, shutting them down, and then putting them in camps. Tucker, this is the road we're on again. And it's not right if it's the left or the right that is doing it. It's absolutely un-American. You can't have freedom of speech if you can't express yourself in a meaningful place. This is like the Germans with the Jews behind the wall. They would put them in the ghetto. Well, this is the digital ghetto. You can talk all you want. Jews, you do whatever you want behind the wall. Well, that's not meaningful. And that's where we are. That's where millions of Americans will be. And again, it's not to compare it to the Germans. It is not to do anything but warn. If you don't stand up for free speech, you will be the one that loses it as well. After 9/11, I stood up proudly against many in my audience for Bill Maher when he said, well, at least their pilots aren't cowards. I thought that was a horrific thing to say. But when ABC fired him, I couldn't understand what part of politically incorrect didn't you understand, ABC? Right. We have to, the only speech worth defending is the speech you despise. Everything else, nobody has a problem with. They're not trying to ban it.
I grew up in a pretty liberal place, and what you just said.
And that's the problem. We need good classic liberals, people who believe in the Bill of Rights. I don't care who you vote for, what you do, how you live, who you have sex with. Do you believe in the Bill of Rights? Do you believe in those things? If you do, that's our unum. That's what we can unite on. Right now, people are asking us to unite on what? On exactly what you believe? That's not coming together. Let me also give you something else here. Let me just quote this. The corporation cannot curtail the liberty of press and religion of these people consistent with the purposes of the Constitution guarantees. And certainly the corporation can no more deprive people of freedom of press and religion than it can discriminate against commerce. Ownership does not always mean absolute dominion. The owners of privately held bridges, ferries, turnpikes, and railroads may not operate them as freely as a farmer does on his own farm. That's the Supreme Court of the United States in 1946. Marsh versus Alabama. The corporation cannot curtail. I am a free market person. I believe in the free market and the freedom of the corporations, but not to take away people's rights, their basic rights.
That's exactly, and you just hit on the irony at the center of libertarianism. If you support a system that eliminates people's rights, you're not standing for freedom. In fact, you're standing for tyranny. I've never heard it as nicely put as you just did.
Yes.
Glenn Greenwald, thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.